A giant robot dinosaur should really be as straightforward as it gets. So why isn't MechaGodzilla ever straightforward? Over the years, he's been an alien Terminator bot, a reverse-engineered future tech machine, a necromanced cyborg, a
nanomachine, son,
city, and yet another cybernetic necromancy, just with an alien dragon kaiju skull. The silver-plated tyrant of machines has always been a reflection of Godzilla, especially when built by humanity, as well as a bit of a cautionary warning for what happens when we meddle with forces we can't even begin to comprehend. And when it comes to the most controversial of these, it would seem there is a great deal we did not realize about. If you guys haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe for more. Comment below what are actually your thoughts on MechaGodzilla, which one actually is your favorite, and which one do you think did it best? Anyway, down there, don't forget to leave a like. It is the best way to help make sure more people like you guys find these videos. Amusingly enough, this video actually started out a lot differently than it ended, much like the last one, because I quickly realized, yeah, that video was going to get off topic way too fast and also probably be 2 hours long. As a reflection of Godzilla made by humanity, at least concerning every single one of them post the original, or at least in part made by humanity, we tend to look at just that. If it is a mindless machine like Heisei or the original, or heck, even the greatly disliked MechaGodzilla City, while those who do have a digital consciousness, we tunnel vision on it purely being a continuation of the organic host, much like Kiryu with the original Godzilla, or today's subject, monsterverse MechaGodzilla and King Ghidorah, rather than actually looking at how the mechanization process has heavily changed them. Even Kiryu, for his part, while originally as Godzilla, he was a confused, lashing out at wrathful fury just against the world, as he didn't know what happened, not understanding the nuclear detonations that took his family and home from him. That was when he was the original Godzilla. Now, as Kiryu, he is a much more focused and aware being, knowing what humanity did and striking back not because of what happened to him originally, but rather for his own death and cybernetic rebirth, being pulled back from the afterlife and being forced to fight his own kind. The original Godzilla's motivation is not what drives Kiryu. In fact, as a community, we draw a very clear delineation between the original Godzilla and Kiryu as two separate individuals, despite them quite literally being the same character. So why is it we do the opposite with MechaGodzilla from the monsterverse, considering him merely a continuation of King Ghidorah, as both MechaGodzilla and King Ghidorah have actually very little in common other than the desire to end Godzilla, because it ignores the entire point that it is an apex cybernetics programming, essentially anti-Godzilla destroyer bot. It's as if just the simple presence of the King Ghidorah skull flips a switch that suddenly he is not MechaGodzilla. He can't be a reflection of Godzilla because he is King Ghidorah. Despite the fact that MechaGodzilla 2 kind of does the same thing, and this insane leap of logic that has absolutely little support in the actual movie. I also need to remind, for probably the 17th time on the channel, that the novels are not canon. The Godzilla vs. Kong novel itself and the writer of them have admitted they never saw King of the Monsters before writing it. Hence the discrepancy of two King Ghidorah skulls, one being in the machine, one being as the remote control unit, as well as trying to tie Apex Cybernetics and Monarch to the Oxygen Destroyer, despite King of the Monsters making it very clear it was solely a US military project that Monarch did not know about until literal seconds before its detonation. As for the common argument that MechaGodzilla in the Monsterverse is not a reflection of Godzilla because he is Ghidorah, this argument absolutely infuriates me, because the movie itself very clearly spells out he is exactly a reflection of Godzilla created by humanity. He is quite literally the Omni-Man meme of, look what they need to do to mimic a fraction of our power. It is a mecha specifically designed in Godzilla's image, powered by the same energy signature Godzilla's atomic power draws on, utilizing an alien dragon space kaiju skull as a remote control, merged with humanity's cutting-edge technology, weaponry, and artificial intelligence. In universe, the reason for his design to specifically emulate Godzilla is to essentially take his legitimacy as Earth's alpha titan, as the other titans themselves respect Godzilla and bow to his will, to put that on humanity and take it for themselves to make the titans obey him or wipe them out. It is also a deliberate mockery of Godzilla, in a way that is not unlike how in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arcana fought Yugi with a deck of 3 Dark Magicians and a much more Dark Magician-focused deck, designed to mock Yugi himself by utilizing his own monster against him to a far greater capacity, to prove to himself that he is the true master of the Dark Magician, not Yugi. Walter even flat out says he wants to replace Godzilla and reassert human supremacy over the Titans, no longer wishing for us to be at their mercy anymore. Which is why he basically baited Godzilla into attacking him, calling him a threat and getting people to turn against Godzilla. Even Monarch takes their stance against Godzilla after these attacks. He is certainly a far greater reflection of Godzilla than, really, MechaGodzilla 2, who even has a similar King Ghidorah origin, being built off the future tech of Mecha King Ghidorah. Kiryu is straight up the consciousness of the original Godzilla, yet we consider him a separate character, despite also being a continuation of the original. So, as we're going to go into further, why is the same not done for MonsterVerse MechaGodzilla and MonsterVerse King Ghidorah, when it is made very clear that the consciousness driving MechaGodzilla is really, even a fraction of it is only King Ghidorah, to very little of King Ghidorah is actually quote-unquote alive in there. This really is just the tip of the iceberg, and like Thor who should have gone for the head, we're going for the skull first. The crux of this entire issue being Kevin's skull, who, for simplicity, we will be referring to for the rest of the video as Kevin 1.0. This is the head that Godzilla ripped off in his battle after Rodan was awakened and was later found by Alan Jonah. Now, I love a good Kevin meme as much as the next guy. We love to joke that he's the silly one, when he is simply a much more curious individual. His function within the Ghidorah trio is the lookout and observer to Ikki's mastermind and Knee's axe-crazy Blood Knight. He is, after all, still a piece of an omnicidal alien dragon space kaiju. Officially, it is stated that King Ghidorah's neurons are laid throughout his entire body. This is why Kevin 2.0 has the same personality and memories as the original, and the skull itself would not be able to contain the full scope of Ghidorah's mind. At best, the entire head that was ripped off is maybe a tenth of Ghidorah's body size, and that is being extremely generous. Telepathy, while it is indeed present for King Ghidorah, is simply meant for communication between the heads. So while thinking is partially contained to the individual heads themselves, we actually see that in order for information to be shared between them, they need to, for lack of a better word, talk to one another. Knee has basically to comment something to Ikki before vaporizing the humans. It's not this instant awareness where Ikki is aware and able to see through the eyes of Knee and Kevin and vice versa. This is why the idea that Kevin 1.0 is a glorified backup drive with the full scope and content of King Ghidorah, and as such, MechaGodzilla is King Ghidorah, is absurd. Because it would have to mean that King Ghidorah's consciousness, King Ghidorah's 1.0 consciousness at best, is contained entirely within the skulls, which is plainly shown to not be the case, or, as is a lot more suggested, that it is this cosmic omniscient ether that is transferred over to Kevin 1.0 after King Ghidorah 2.0 got vaporized. Something that has absolutely no basis in the film. This is an insane logic leap, since at best it would be a copy of Ghidorah up until the ocean battle, having absolutely no knowledge of Godzilla's two power-ups, both from the nuke and Mothra, as well as no knowledge of King Ghidorah's massive shift in combat style at Boston, which is actually what we're going to be going into next, because King Ghidorah fights dramatically differently when it comes to the Boston showdown, or at least partway through it. And none of his behavior before the Boston fight matches the way MechaGodzilla behaves. Yes, this sort of resurrection did happen with Mothra, but Mothra is also a legitimate divine moth goddess who was revived by a straight-up magic ritual. This is to say nothing of the fact that Ghidorah 2.0 was panicking when it came to Godzilla. I don't think he would do that if he knew he had a Soul Jar backup drive brain in Kevin 1.0. His battle mannerisms as King Ghidorah are actually pretty well nuanced. Despite his absolutely enormous galaxy-sized ego and his detrimental pride, King Ghidorah is a very smart battler. What he wants is simply a one-on-one duel with Godzilla, to defeat him and overcome his previous defeat in the past. This is actually why he leaves Antarctica after he and Godzilla had what is essentially a quick draw duel, and Monarch began to bombard him. This simply annoyed him, so he left, as this was not the kind of showdown he wanted, more so than actually fearing Monarch posed a threat to him. With the ocean battle, Godzilla needed to ambush him, but at the end of the fight, Godzilla would have actually won that battle as he was pulled underwater, where Godzilla has the very significant advantage. This only falsely confirmed to King Ghidorah that Godzilla was much weaker than him, and that on land, Ghidorah would be able to beat him in a one-on-one. This is why at Boston, he still went for the one-on-one against Godzilla, calling in Rodan to deal with Mothra, and midway through, his battling style actually shifts. In both the battle in Antarctica and the start of the Boston battle, though to a lesser degree within the Boston battle, they both actually posture, sizing one another up in almost an intimidation display. You know, your typical pre-battle villain-hero fight monologue, just we don't get to hear the monologues. Since King Ghidorah's pure ego just overrides his thinking, he routinely would underestimate Godzilla in Boston. As a result, he consciously chooses not to use his most devastating abilities, like his ability to summon storms with atmokinesis, his flight, or his energy siphon bite attack. That's why Ghidorah is actually fighting on the ground most of the time. He wants to best Godzilla on what is Godzilla's own turf, deliberately disadvantaging himself in this one hand tied behind my back style of fighting, simply to satisfy his own pride by outfighting Godzilla this way. He also wants to make the fight as slow, drawn out, and painful as possible. That's why even when he realizes Godzilla is much more competent in a battle than he underestimated, after doing the drop from low orbit, he goes back to trying to draw the fight out, slowly siphoning off Godzilla's energy just to make it more painful, as opposed to simply doing that over and over and over again, or outright ending him with the gravity beams. Normally rather calm, collected, and calculating, he fights methodically when on the ground. Only when realizing Godzilla is made of sterner stuff does he actually start to utilize more abilities, and you can see this calmness start to break. He's actually panicking when he grabs onto the power station to basically summon the massive lightning burst, and it wipes out Monarch. This was also done because he wanted no distractions. As you can actually see, he doesn't really attack Godzilla with it, it's primarily to wipe out Monarch. But that calm demeanor is slowly being chipped away. It's no surprise after this is when Ghidorah does the drop from orbit. Supporting this, when Ghidorah does the triple bite attack, he doesn't use the energy siphon prior in the fight. Despite later on in the fight, when he bites Godzilla, he uses the energy siphon. He consciously chose not to use most of his powers in a pride-driven ego move. Ultimately, that would cause his own demise. By the end of the fight, all of this is gone, as thermonuclear Godzilla is more than able to dispatch King Ghidorah, much to his own horror and outright panic. This also only after Iki notices thermonuclear Godzilla is there, as both Kevin 2.0 and Ni are vaporized. His wings are burnt off, and Iki didn't seem to realize this. You can actually see where his head is turned. He's trying to run away and finds he can't. Yes, Iki did not realize both Ni and Kevin 2.0 were gone. That means a head needs to be both alive and present for the telepathic conversation, showing Kevin 1.0 is completely disconnected from the loop. Once again, at best, it's a soul jar of Ghidorah 1.0, and a mere fragment of that at best. The one who would still hold on to his pride, even to his own detriment. This is to say absolutely nothing of the Apex Cybernetics AI and Ren Serizawa. The skull is definitely something that played a very big role in the mind of MechaGodzilla, even if it is an overall, relatively small component of the consciousness. Ren was not a good person to begin with, though he was slowly being affected by the control system psionic uplink of the skull system, as Ghidorah's lingering subconsciousness, or really more of a general impression of him, was still lingering. Repeated use of this would cause his subconscious to merge and unmerge with Ren, opening him up to the detrimental effects of such an uplink. It would intensify his disdain of the Titans, especially Godzilla, and make him far more unhinged with every usage, deriving a sick pleasure from ending Skullcrawlers when he started from a fairly understandable and even identifiable intentions. His hatred of Godzilla stemmed from his father always being away, but at the end, he always wanted to reconcile with Ishiro Serizawa. But post his sacrifice to save Godzilla, this was all completely halted. Now, the reason Dr. Serizawa actually was away for most of his childhood was actually due to the fact that Dr. Serizawa's own father was a part of Monarch, so Ishiro was actually very familiar with this. He understood what the job entailed and what his father was doing, which is why he felt that Ren would understand as well, showing that Ren was not really a good person at heart. Or at least there was a significant enough darkness in him that the Ghidorah consciousness, or subconscious, was actually able to intensify. But this does not mean that it was a conscious effort by Ghidorah to corrupt this human's mind. It was an impression of Ghidorah that exacerbated and corroded his mind. In a way, not unlike, of all things, Queen Sectania from Kirby. The Dimension Mirror, or the Amazing Mirror, which trapped both Dark Mind and Dark Meta Knight, over time twisted her from a ruler that was a benevolent one, albeit with one with a fixation on beauty, to... But the more she used the mirror, a gift from her friend Tyranza, the more the darkness would affect her, intensifying this fixation with beauty, causing her to seize and possess bodies she found increasingly beautiful than her current one, turning this fixation into a narcissistic, maniacal obsession. though even in the depths of this all-consuming obsession, she'd have flashes of clarity, remembering Tyranz's voice, but this was mostly overridden as she had become a tyrannical despot. But Dark Mind and Dark Meta Knight were not consciously doing this to her, they were not controlling her. It was simply opening herself up to evil accidentally, making her evil. We see this with Ren, just not as severe. He still had most of himself there, expressing concern about utilizing the untested inner Earth energy introduced into MechaGodzilla, as it could have some negative impacts that they don't understand yet. However, in the end, he does go to fight Godzilla despite the risks. We can actually see that this soul jar influence is felt by others and it's not just exclusive to the psionic uplink, meaning it's not intentional. Maddie Russell can hear Ghidorah's chittering. This what actually draws her to the room that the skull is in, despite the fact that Bernie and the guy from Deadpool 2 don't hear this. Why would a conscious King Ghidorah allow his presence to be felt by others he was not in control of? Especially those who would try to stop him, since again, it is a psychic thing that invades your mind. The answer: it's not conscious, it's just an impression of Ghidorah's malevolence that is still lingering and attached to the skull. Now, when the power surge does hit, this does complicate things, since the screens do say that Ren is disconnected, but the visor is still on, as well as the system is also glitching out, as well as, yes, MechaGodzilla is moving on his own before Ren gets zapped, but it's moving actually very slowly, and only after smashing Walter Simmons and then the power surge hitting Ren does it actually move much more fluidly. He is physically smashing his way out of the Apex Cybernetics building, rather than utilizing the proton stream or his excessive weapon systems or even the drill tail to escape. Again, only after Ren gets electrocuted does it activate the proton stream. The reason for this is very likely since Ren's mind was now fused with it. As before, it was purely Ghidorah's violent impulses mixed with Apex Cybernetics programming to go fight Godzilla, causing it to go haywire. You can even see during Ren's electrocution, his eyes are rolling back into his head the exact same way they do when he's utilizing MechaGodzilla's psionic uplink. There's also nothing that the skull room is also destroyed in the escape. It's pretty much right underneath where Walter Simmons was standing. As if Ghidorah was in control through the skull, that would have been shut down the second that room was destroyed, because the skull was simply a glorified transmitter and processor. Not to mention that when the alcohol is poured on the control console and it causes MechaGodzilla to shut down for a second, that severed the link between the skull, if it was even still present, and the mecha, meaning Ghidorah's consciousness is entirely out of the loop, and MechaGodzilla still behaves the same. This would indicate that Apex Cybernetics AI is a much more dominating part of the intelligence, with its singular desire to be to destroy the Titans, with a little bit of corruption from Ghidorah, adding a little bit more desire to cause destruction, and Ren's influence in specifically targeting Godzilla, and of all things, actually his fighting style, making him much more of an overwhelmingly AI malfunctioned berserk machine. Behavior-wise, MechaGodzilla has none of King Ghidorah's pride or ego. It is a straightforward, cut-to-the-chase business. While King Ghidorah held back the vast majority of his powers, MechaGodzilla immediately launches into next to all of his weapon systems, launching a first strike missile barrage twice as Godzilla and MechaGodzilla are closing the distance, utilizing his jet-boosted plasma punches, and absolutely zero inclination to use the Alpha Call, despite the fact that this is an ability that was shown to be active when Apex was purely in control of it and it was purely at the direction of Walter and Ren. And actually, the surge caused this to happen during the infusion of inner Earth energy. The only weapons that MechaGodzilla does not use when he is fighting Godzilla are the grinders and saws in his mouth and hands, as well as the tail drill. These are far less effective against Godzilla's much more heavily armored hide, and it would have taken pinning Godzilla to the ground or a building to expose his underbelly, which is notably less armored but still well armored, for the drill to be used. This is why towards the end of the fight, that's when MechaGodzilla tries to use it, because Godzilla has been tired out further. Doing this would also give Godzilla more openings to counter with his atomic breath. Its fighting style is simply a straight-up beatdown tactic, fighting eerily like a human, with grappling punches and kicks. This hyper-offensive tactic would not make sense if it was Ghidorah, as Kevin 1.0 would not know about Godzilla's numerous buffs he's gotten, and would still be operating under past Ghidorah's ego, wanting to hold back his powers and fight Godzilla on equal terms, simply to prove his superiority. Knowing he would need to go all out and kaiju handle Godzilla, slamming him around building after building to daze him, is not something Ghidorah would ever do. His pride and ego would not allow it, as he would want to draw the battle out, while MechaGodzilla wants to finish it quick, fast, and in a hurry. That's the reason why after he dazes Godzilla by slamming him around buildings, he goes for the kiss of death, literal decapitation strike. Beyond a base desire to snuff out Godzilla's life, their personalities have next to nothing in common. And even then, a large part of that comes from the programming and Ren's personal vendetta against Godzilla, which, Ren being in the mix, makes far more sense given his fighting style is a lot more human-like. Punching and grapples are very similar to the way Kong actually fights. Though his MechaGodzilla consciousness is not just any one individual. Much like Yami Bakura from Yu-Gi-Oh!, he's not simply Zorak the Dark One or Thief King Bakura. He's a fusion of the both of them and more. Wow, that was a lot. Sorry if I seem to have gone a little bit overboard on this. It's just, man, this really grinds my gears. Because sometimes it feels like people either do not pay attention to the movie itself, and either let their headcanons from misunderstanding things in the actual movie, or having been misinformed on certain things, shapes everything. To people who are actively lying to incite outrage with how much people actually miss the mark on stuff. Cough, cough, Blackaroonie. Cough, cough. To people who are just mad the MonsterVerse actually did something really well. The butthurt naysayers need to get petty about it. That or they're just tourists or creators looking for outrage bait. I will defend MonsterVerse MechaGodzilla until I draw my last breath. Kiryu may be my favorite, but this is a very close second. I am all for criticism, when it is valid. Not just reeing into the void because you don't like them making a new origin for their incarnation of MechaGodzilla that still draws on the past. Could it have been better? Yes. Could it have been a lot more fleshed, or rather chromed out? Yes. But what we got is still freaking cool. And it's a very faithful distillation of traits of every single past MechaGodzilla into one. I'll say it again, and I will continue to repeat it. The MonsterVerse's biggest strength, other than actually being able to show kaiju with their personalities and at the scope and scale Toho had always wanted to do, is Legendary's ability to reinvent the monsters, to create a new origin that does respect the roots, but are not simply a carbon copy. But what are your thoughts? If you guys watched this far, please don't forget to subscribe for more, as I can guess you guys really love kaiju content. Comment below, leave a like on the video. And do you think MechaGodzilla's just Ghidorah again, or is he very much his own character? just with a little bit of the omnicidal alien blood in his circuitry. I've been MaxGodzilla. Thank you once again, and long live the Kaiju King.